Thursday morning in Washington, D.C. felt like every other one. The marble floors inside the Rayburn House Office building gleamed under cold fluorescent lights. Congressional staff rushed through the halls, coffee cups in hand, while the faint hum of political small talk filled the air. Another hearing, another set of cameras, another round of carefully scripted outrage. But for Jasmine Crockett, this morning wasn't routine. She sat quietly at the far end of hearing room 2141, flipping through a thick folder of documents, her gray blazer pressed, her notes precise, her expression unreadable. From a distance, she blended in just another face at the Oversight Committee table. And that's exactly how they wanted her. Over the last 4 years, Crockett had learned how Washington worked. Loud gestures for the cameras, but behind closed doors, silence protected the powerful. They called it oversight, but they rarely meant it, especially when it came to people like Hera, black woman from Texas, sharp as a blade, but easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. She paid attention. Today's hearing was billed as routine, an oversight review of federal charitable funds supporting military families. It sounded noble, patriotic, non-controversial, the kind of headline the White House liked, especially because the face of that initiative wasn't some distant bureaucrat. It was the First Lady herself, Melania Trump, smiling on magazine covers, cutting ribbons at charity galas, thanking donors for their generosity. The National Military Family Support Fund was her crown jewel project, painted in red, white, and blue. But Crockett wasn't here for the cameras or the slogans. She was here for the numbers. For months, she'd quietly traced discrepancies buried in donation ledgers, payments routed through unfamiliar companies, vendor names that led to dead-end addresses, financial reports that looked polished on the surface but cracked when you read the fine print. The problem wasn't the speeches. It wasn't the photo ops. It was what happened when the cameras left the room. That's what Crockett came to expose. And yet, as always, they underestimated her. A young Republican aide strutted past her desk, a smug grin tugging at his lips as he dropped off a thin packet of committee briefs. His voice dipped low, meant only for her to hear. "Leave the financials to the real players," he quipped, tapping her folder with the back of his hand. "That pile's a little heavy for the clerical staff." He was gone before she could respond, laughing to himself as he walked away. Crockett didn't react. She didn't need to. The comment was nothing new. 1,000 quiet slights wrapped in office banter. The same old Rula smile. Stay quiet. Let the men explain the math to you, even when they're the ones who've never balanced a budget in their lives. She smiled, tired, practiced, then turned back to her notes. They thought she was background noise, a face on a committee roster, someone they could ignore until they couldn't. Because behind her quiet, steady expression was 4 years of preparation, years of watching how the system covered for itself, years of tracing the loopholes they thought no one would find. She'd watched military families get paraded across stages, their stories reduced to sound bites, while their real needs vanished in the fine print. She'd watched millions of dollars pass through that fund, supposedly earmarked for support but reappearing in places that made no sense. Slovenian shell companies, consultant fees paid to firms with no staff, no track record, no clear purpose except maybe to keep the money away from the people it was meant to help. The face of the fund was Melania Trump. The real story? It was buried in paperwork, and Crockett had it. The red light above the hearing room door flicked on. Session in progress. Reporters filed in. Photographers positioned themselves for good angles. Chairman Paul Gentry adjusted his tie, glanced across the room, oblivious to what Crockett was holding. Across the aisle, Republican committee members exchanged lazy, confident glances. They saw today as another softball session, another chance to tout patriotism, to praise the First Lady, to slap each other on the back and move on. They didn't see Crockett coming. She exhaled slowly, checked the first page of her folder one last time. The hearing came to order. She didn't fidget, didn't shift in her seat, didn't let the irritation from that aide's smug jab follow her into this moment. Because in Washington, They always underestimated the quiet ones. But silence? That was just strategy. And Crockett? She was done staying quiet. The thing about Washington was it taught you how to wear a smile, even when your teeth clenched behind it. Jasmine Crockett had mastered that long ago. For 4 years, she'd sat through hearing after hearing, watched her colleagues shower each other with empty praise, watched headlines celebrate photo ops while the fine print told a different story. And through it all, she smiled. Not because she believed in the theater of it, but because she understood the weight behind that silence. Today, the weight was heavier than usual. Across the room, Chairman Paul Gentry shuffled through his notes, clearly prepped for an easy session, talking points about patriotism, praise for Melania Trump's charity work, platitudes about standing with military families. It was the same routine every time. But Crockett had seen the other side, the side that didn't make it onto campaign ads. The National Military Families Support Fund was supposed to be a lifeline. That's how they sold it. A promise to the families who sacrificed everything. A safety net for those left behind when loved ones deployed or never came home. The problem was, the math didn't add up. Crockett had stayed late in her office, poring over public filings, financial disclosures, and tax records that most people ignored. And buried beneath glossy reports and patriotic language, the numbers told a different story. Millions raised, millions promised. But when she followed the trail, too many of those dollars disappeared into the fog. She found consulting firms paid extravagant sums with no clear deliverables. Foreign companies receiving grants meant for veterans. Administrative fees that ballooned overnight. And time after time, when she brought it up, nothing happened. Her colleagues brushed her off. Staffers made jokes behind her back. Reporters changed the subject. Because no one wanted to question the First Lady. Melania Trump wasn't just a political spouse. She was an image, poised, untouchable, wrapped in designer suits and soft-spoken charm. And the charity work? That was her shield. No one wanted to be the one to dent that image. But Crockett? She wasn't here to play along. The truth wasn't a popularity contest. Every time she smiled in those committee meetings, it wasn't agreement, it was calculation. Because timing mattered more than outrage. And when you were one of the few black women in the room, you learned to pick your moments. Today was that moment. A few seats down, Congressman Glenn Bradbury scrolled on his phone, half listening as opening remarks droned on. His party's strategy was obvious: defend the fund, praise the First Lady, discredit anyone who dared raise questions. They were confident. Crockett let them be. Across the aisle, aides passed out pre-drafted statements. Journalists whispered about upcoming segments. The room buzzed with complacency. They thought this was just another photo op. They hadn't read what Crockett had. Weeks ago, an anonymous source slid a manila envelope under her office door. No name, no note, just documents, bank statements, wire transfers. Records connecting key figures in the charity's leadership to shell companies overseas. Slovenia, Luxembourg, the Caymans. Names that mattered, dates that didn't match the official narrative. Crockett spent sleepless nights cross-referencing those documents, verifying details, checking with independent financial experts. What she found wasn't just mismanagement, it was a betrayal. Military families scraping by, holding on to hope, while funds meant for them quietly vanished. And the face of it all? The same face on magazine covers. The same woman giving speeches about compassion, loyalty, and sacrifice. Melania Trump. Crockett smiled at the memory, the headlines, the staged galas, the photo ops with veterans. It all looked so sincere. But sincerity didn't balance budgets. Numbers did. She carried those numbers with her now, tucked in her folder, waiting for the right moment. The chairman cleared his throat, glancing toward her, oblivious. Next to him, Representative Molly Kincaid from Oregon leaned over, whispering, "You good?" Crockett gave a small nod, her pulse steady, her expression composed. "Good," she replied, her voice calm but sharp beneath the surface. The chairman called for opening statements. Praise flowed predictably. Committee members took turns commending the First Lady's unwavering support for military families. Across the room, cameras clicked. Reporters jotted down sound bites. It was all going according to script. But scripts only worked when everyone stuck to the lines. And Crockett? She had her own lines. She carried the weight behind the smile. The weight of every family promised help and forgotten. The weight of every dollar raised under false pretenses. The weight of being told to wait her turn, to stay quiet, to trust the process, while the system shielded itself. They underestimated that weight. But today, they were going to feel it. The hearing continued, the room oblivious to what was coming. Crockett didn't rush. She didn't need to. Her time was coming. And when it did, the smile would still be there, but this time, they'd understand what was behind it. It didn't take long for the routine to unravel. The Oversight Committee plowed through its scripted talking point sprays for military families, patriotic tributes, numbers designed to sound impressive without saying much. The cameras captured it all. Polished statements, well-rehearsed concern. But Jasmine Crockett waited. She didn't speak during the first round. She let the others talk. Let them fill the room with empty applause for the National Military Families Support Fund. Let them believe this was just another staged performance. Because that's how power protects itself in comfortable repetition. But Crockett didn't come here to repeat anything. Her moment arrived as the second round of questioning began. Chairman Paul Gentry glanced toward her with the same dismissive nod he'd given 100 times before, like she was background noise. She wasn't. Crockett adjusted her blazer. Her folder sat neatly before her, the same one the Republican aide had mocked hours earlier. Now, it was the most dangerous thing in the room. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "Mr. Chairman, I have a few clarifying questions regarding the fund's financial disclosures," she began, her tone neutral. Across the room, eyes glazed over. No one expected fireworks from line-item inquiries. Just another audit, another checkbox. But then Crockett turned a page, held up a document stamped with official seals, notarized and authenticated. It wasn't a speech. It was evidence. According to filings submitted to the IRS and public charity registries, she continued, there's a discrepancy in the fund's vendor payments. A few heads tilted. Staffers shifted in their seats. Crockett pressed on, flipping to a highlighted section. This report indicates that $2.3 million allocated for veteran housing support was instead routed through Global Horizon Consulting, an entity registered in Slovenia, with no active business operations within the United States. Silence. The kind of silence that stretches tight across a room, holding its breath. 3 seats down, Congressman Glenn Bradbury stiffened. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Crockett didn't pause. She produced more documents: wire transfers, registration records, corporate filings. Each page a fracture in the carefully constructed facade. Behind her, reporters leaned forward, cameras refocused, pens scrawling faster. No one had seen this coming. But Crockett had been building toward it for months. Global Horizon lists as a vendor for strategic development, she continued, her voice even. But records show 0 employees, 0 domestic infrastructure, and a direct ownership link to Excelsior Holdings in Ljubljana, Slovenia, the First Lady's birthplace. Suddenly, no one was scrolling on their phones. No one was laughing. Even the chairman's practiced expression faltered. From the back row, a young reporter mouthed, "Did she just—" She did. Crockett didn't name Melania Trump. She didn't have to. The paper trail spoke louder than names. She sipped water, let the weight of the moment settle. Across the aisle, Republican aides scrambled phones buzzing, whispered huddles forming. Chairman Gentry cleared his throat, fumbling. "Congresswoman, let's keep the discussion focused on process," he managed, his voice uneven. Crockett smiled faintly, the same tired, practiced smile they'd misread for years. "I am focused on process," she replied. a process where millions raised for military families don't vanish into offshore entities with no accountability. She placed the documents down, neatly aligned. The room changed. Reporters began drafting headlines mid-hearing. Phones vibrated with news alerts. Social media stirred. And the faces of those who had dismissed her hours earlier, they cracked just like the image they'd spent years cultivating. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. Just math. Numbers that didn't lie. And a question that hung heavier than any accusation. Where did the money go? Crockett leaned back, quiet, composed. The curtain had slipped. The stage wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the facts. And for the first time in years, they couldn't hide behind applause. The hearing room never truly recovered after Jasmine Crockett's quiet reveal. The numbers spoke for themselves. The documents laid bare what polite conversation had kept hidden. A charity meant to support military families was quietly routing funds through obscure foreign entities, one of which tied back to Slovenia First Lady's homeland. And Crockett? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The louder the room got, the side whispers, the shuffling papers, the frantic texts, the quieter she became. Because that's how truth works. It doesn't need volume, just precision. The House Oversight Committee stumbled forward, but the rhythm was broken. Chairman Paul Gentry rushed through procedural formalities. His words clipped, his usual confidence missing. Across the room, Glenn Bradbury scribbled notes furiously, face pale. Republican aides filtered in and out of the chamber, some taking calls, others exchanging panicked glances. The press was already ahead of them. Within minutes, hashtag surfaced. Where did the money go? Military families deserve better. By noon, news outlets were breaking down Crockett's document dump, highlighting foreign transactions, tracing shell companies, questioning how millions meant for American veterans disappeared overseas. But the most damning details? Crockett never uttered Melania Trump's name. That silence? It was surgical. It forced the public to connect the dots on their own. It forced the people in power to explain themselves. And at the White House, the storm hit like clockwork. Inside the West Wing, senior advisors crowded into a briefing room. Documents spread across the table, television screens replaying Crockett's remarks on loop. Donald Trump stood rigid, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the screen. She didn't say her name. Press Secretary Carla McNair offered cautiously. She didn't have to, Trump snapped, his knuckles whitening against the chair's edge. Everyone knows what she meant. The room tensed. Hope Daniels, his senior advisor, tapped her tablet, flipping through early reactions online. It's moving fast, she reported. Media outlets are tying this to Melania's charity appearances, the connections being made whether she said it or not. Trump's face darkened. I want response teams on every network by 6 p.m., he ordered. And get Gentry, why didn't he shut this down? Across town, Paul Gentry was fielding his own crisis. Reporters surrounded him outside the Capitol, bombarding him with questions. Congressman, did you know about the offshore payments? Is the committee planning a formal investigation? Is the First Lady connected to these transactions? Gentry fumbled through rehearsed lines about patriotism and supporting military families, but his words fell flat. The facts were already in the open. And Crockett? She didn't have to say a thing. Her restraint was sharper than accusation. Later that evening, Crockett appeared on Nation Talk with Latrice Greera, primetime interview watched by millions. Latrice didn't waste time. Congresswoman, she began, you've ignited a firestorm today, but you never directly accused anyone. Was that intentional? Crockett's gaze didn't waver. The numbers don't need my interpretation, she replied calmly. The money moved. The documents are clear. My job is to present the facts. Greer leaned in, pressing further. Some say you implied the First Lady is involved. Crockett's voice was even, almost soft. I implied nothing. But I do believe families sacrificing everything for this country deserve transparency. They deserve better than financial smoke and mirrors. The internet exploded. Clips of her answer went viral. No accusation, just accountability. Truth doesn't whisper, it shows up with receipts. By morning, Melania Trump's team scrambled for damage control. But their options were limited. Any statement risked legitimizing the questions. Silence, though? That spoke volumes. The White House issued a boilerplate press release praising the First Lady's charity work, condemning partisan distractions, and insisting all finances were above board. But the damage was done. Editorials rolled out, questioning conflicts of interest. Veteran organizations demanded answers. Military families flooded social media with personal stories of struggling while funds meant to support them vanished. In press briefings, reporters pushed harder. Where is the First Lady? Will she address the allegations? McNair deflected, but the message was clear: the usual distractions weren't working. Meanwhile, Crockett remained composed, declining most interview requests, sticking to her mantra. I didn't come to fight personalities. I came to follow the money. Her restraint infuriated opponents more than any attack could have. Because when truth is precise, it cuts deeper than outrage. And Crockett? She held the blade steady. The White House scrambled. Republicans debated strategy behind closed doors. Media outlets dissected every charity transaction. But the question lingered. If everything was above board, why did the money leave the country? In the quiet corners of Capitol Hill, staffers whispered. Lawmakers speculated. And Jasmine Crockett? She stayed quiet, measured, letting the facts echo in rooms they couldn't escape. She didn't swing wildly. She didn't grandstand. She let the blade of truth do what it always does, cut clean, without blood, but leaving marks they couldn't ignore. The thing about silence, when it comes from the powerful, it never really stays quiet. Melania Trump didn't release a statement. She didn't sit for an interview. She didn't tweet a single word. And yet, her absence spoke louder than any press conference could have. Outside the gates of the White House, protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Transparency for all. Military families deserve the truth." Where did the money go? It wasn't just political activists. It wasn't just party lines. It was veterans, spouses, parents, holding photographs of loved ones in uniform. Because for them, this wasn't about headlines, it was personal. Inside conservative circles, panic simmered. Republican strategists drafted talking points, urging calm, insisting the fund's financials were clean. But behind closed doors, no one could explain the offshore accounts. No one could deny the trail Jasmine Crockett had laid bare. And the longer Melania stayed silent, the louder the questions grew. At Capitol Hill cafes, journalists swapped theories. At kitchen tables across the country, families scrolled through news feeds, comparing their own struggles to the millions funneled away from military support programs. In town halls, constituents pressed their representatives. If there's nothing to hide, why is she hiding? The White House scrambled to refocus the narrative. A carefully staged charity event was Planeta School Visit, children waving flags, Melania handing out care packages. But days before the event, it was abruptly canceled. Scheduling conflicts, they claimed. But everyone knew better. The First Lady wasn't hiding from cameras, she was hiding from questions. And that silence? It echoed. It echoed in every news segment where anchors dissected her absence. It echoed in every editorial demanding accountability. It echoed every time a veteran spouse told their story of scraping by while funds meant to support them vanished. Crockett didn't have to do much now. Her job was done. She walked the halls of Congress, composed as ever, declining most interviews, letting the public connect the dots. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about the system facing itself in the mirror. And it wasn't a pretty reflection. On a local radio show in Ohio, a veteran named Marcus shared his story. "I lost my leg in service," he said, voice steady. "Came home, applied for assistance through that fund. Never heard back. But they found the money for foreign consultants?" The host had no response. In New Mexico, a military widow posted on social media. I buried my husband at 27. That fund promised help. They promised scholarships for my kids. I'm still waiting. Her post went viral. By the end of the week, national polling showed trust in the administration's military support initiatives plummeting. But the real damage wasn't statistical, it was cultural. Late-night shows replayed Crockett's calm, precise remarks on loop. Comedians cracked jokes, sure, but beneath the laughter was discomfort. No one could deny the question anymore. Where did the money go? And why did the First Lady's name keep hovering in the background, unspoken but unavoidable? Even within Republican ranks, dissent bubbled. A handful of lawmakers privately urged transparency. Release the records, clear her name, they whispered. But party leadership held firm. Stonewall, distract, deflect. It wasn't working. Every charity gala photo resurfaced with new captions. Every old soundbite about supporting the troops rang hollow. And Melania? She stayed silent. Her public schedule cleared. Her media appearances vanished. Her social media dormant. But the silence wasn't protective, it was radioactive. In whispered circles of power, the frustration grew. She's making it worse, one senior aide muttered behind closed doors. But Crockett never gloated. She never claimed victory. Because for her, this wasn't a political win, it was a reckoning. In an impromptu press huddle, a reporter asked, "Congresswoman, do you regret how this unfolded?" Crockett's answer was measured. "I regret that it took this long for anyone to listen." The clip spread. Commentators debated it. But most understood this moment wasn't hers alone. It belonged to every military family promised more than photo ops. It belonged to every American tired of watching privilege shield itself from accountability. It belonged to the quiet frustration that had simmered for years, finally breaking the surface. In classrooms, teachers used the unfolding scandal as a civics lesson. Transparency isn't optional, one high schooler said during a debate. If leaders can't answer basic questions, they shouldn't lead. The teacher nodded, but the room already understood. In living rooms, families wondered aloud, if this happened to the First Lady's charity, how much else don't we know? At community centers, military spouses met, comparing notes, forming advocacy groups, demanding systemic reform. And in the quiet corridors of Congress, even those who dismissed Crockett months earlier now whispered, she was right. The White House never released the full financial records. They issued vague denials. They shuffled staff. They pivoted to new controversies. But the damage lingered. Melania Trump never addressed the charity scandal directly. Her silence hung in the air, polished, controlled, but unmistakably hollow. And every time she appeared in public, every gala, every fundraiser, every staged moment, the question returned. The echo couldn't be escaped. The curtain had slipped. The illusion cracked. And the truth, quiet, steady, undeniable, was still standing. Because sometimes the sharpest blade isn't anger. It's patience. It's facts. It's letting silence expose what speeches can't hide. And Jasmine Crockett, she understood that better than anyone. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need their permission to tell the truth. She just needed the echo to keep following theme memory where they went. And it did. And maybe that's the part no one ever tells you. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence that makes people stop, look closer, question what they thought they understood. Have you ever been there? In a space where you knew the truth, but speaking it felt impossible? Where staying quiet wasn't weakness, but waiting for the moment that mattered most. You're not alone. And stories like Jasmine Crockett's remind us that patience is power. That dignity, even when ignored, has its day. And that quiet strength, it doesn't always make headlines, but it leaves echoes the world can't escape. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe, so you won't miss the voices that often go unheard. Share this story with someone who believes their truth doesn't matter, because it does. Your voice, your story, they deserve space. Remember what Jasmine showed us today. You don't have to shout when the truth knows how to speak for itself. I'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.